Thank you for coming today and attending this great event. As everybody here knows, last week, AFA turned 80 on the 4th of February. Back then, Hap Arnold charged my predecessor, Tom McKee's predecessor, with going out and ensuring the United States of America knew that there was a new sheriff in town, and it's called the United States Air Force. The United States Air Force was not a part of the Army anymore. It was a separate service. At the time, Jimmy Doolittle had that charge. He had the Air Force magazine that was started a couple years before that, and he had a whole bunch of the greatest generation who had just come back from World War II and were around the United States of America to go out and accomplish his mission, which was to basically let everybody know that there was an independent service called the United States Air Force. From that came the rest of our mission, where we promote a dominant Air Force and a dominant Space Force as the foundation for national security, where we support our airmen, our guardians, and their families, and remember and respect our heritage. Those were the kind of things that Jimmy Doolittle started, and over the last 80 years, all the folks between him and us have made better. We're a little bit different AFA today, but the foundations are still the same, and a lot of these people up here today are going to talk to that. We have the panel today of distinguished guests. It's going to be moderated by the chair of the board of the Air and Space Forces Association, Kathleen Ferguson. Kathleen is a career civilian airman, and she spent a lot of time over in that building right near here in the Pentagon. She's off doing bigger and better things right now, and one of those bigger and better things is chair of the board of the Air and Space Forces Association. So Kathleen, I'm going to turn it over to you and your distinguished guests. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, Bert, and thanks to you and your team for pulling this together to recognize our Air and Space Forces Association on its 80th birthday. So I'm going to introduce our panelists first. Up first is Mr. Tom McKee, former AFA National President and Chairman from 1998 through 2002. He was the former National President and Chairman of the Aerospace Education Foundation from 94 to 98. AFA National Secretary from 87 to 90. And today he is the sole surviving original trustee of the Air Force Memorial. And along with his many hats at AFA, he was an under 40 national director from 1984 to 1987. So thanks for being here with us. Chief Joe Bass served 31 years in the Air Force, culminating in becoming the 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Today, she continues to serve as a strategic advisor to senior leaders in academia and corporate America, and is a board member for many national nonprofits, including AFA. Ken Goss, no stranger to anybody in this room. Ken served 28 years as an airman, retired as a colonel, longtime AFA staff member as executive vice president, director of Ledge Affairs, AFA historian, and the voice of AFA for 42 years. And I just have to point out that's more than half of AFA's existence.
Yeah.
So thank you. And Linda McMahon, longtime volunteer, serving 26 years in the Air Force, retired as a colonel. And she's been incredibly active in AFA field leadership positions since 2007, and is currently president of the Central East region, on multiple AFA boards and field committees, and was AFA Member of the Year in 2002. So if you can join me in welcoming this distinguished panel today. So first, I think we'd all love to hear some stories from each one of you on how you got involved with AFA, what brought you to AFA in the first place. And we'll start with Tom and go down the road here.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate being invited to discuss the 80th celebration of the Air Force Association, Air Force and Air and Space Forces Association, but AFA. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize the fact that one of my predecessors passed away about 3 weeks ago, a great patriot, a warrior who flew in Vietnam and was a prisoner of war for 5.5 years, Gene Smith. Gene was a great friend, a great leader of AFA, and certainly a mentor to me and many of my colleagues. So I want to recognize the fact we miss him, but we will never forget him. I recognize also that this being streamed, there are a lot of my colleagues out there that had followed in my footsteps. I'm sure going to kind of critique what I say. So I hope you haven't given out my email address. But I first got involved in AFA actually after I got out of the Air Force. I served in the Air Force. I grew up as an Air Force dependent, but I served in the Air Force for 7 years and was a T-38 instructor pilot, and then an A-7D fighter pilot with Tactical Air Command. When I got out of the Air Force, I joined Grumman Corporation in Long Island, New York. And it happened that I was on a trip to Arizona to go to an Air Force Association event out there. And the then national president was a gentleman named George Douglas. This is 1977, almost 50 years ago. And George talked to me about AFA and told me what it did and thought I ought to join, and I hadn't up until then, and he handed me a pamphlet and I signed up. It was great. It gave me an opportunity being up at Grumman to really get back into the Air Force community, because Grumman was a big Navy company, and they wanted more business in the Air Force community with the EF-111 and such type aircraft. So I got involved there, and then the executive director of the Air Force Association back then was General Russ Doherty, former SINC-SAC. He was a great leader as a staff and really of the entire association. One day I get a call from him and he said, Tommy, he said, this is General Russ Doherty. I said, yes, sir. I felt like standing up. He was a great man. He said, you know George Hardy, don't you? And I said, yes, sir, I do. I didn't know who George Hardy was, and he was a leader in our Aerospace Education Foundation and a prior president and chairman of the Air Force Association itself. They wanted me to join the AEF, which I did. I was honored to get involved in that area. And then later on, I was asked to serve on the AFA board as an under 40 national director. And you can imagine how many years ago that was. And then I also got involved in the Air Force Memorial, which I'll address later. And then I was fortunate enough to get into the position of National President and Chairman of AFA. At the local level, I was involved in the Iron Gate chapter of New York City. And I was president of the chapter, following such great people like Gabby Gabreski, America's greatest living ace back then, both World War II and Korea. And then I chaired the National Air Force Salute Foundation, which was the Iron Gate Ball every year. And we used to fly people from Andrews on a big jet out of Andrews into LaGuardia to go up to this ball with their spouses. And they would attend the ball. We'd have senior congressional people, Senator Barry Goldwater, and all these congressmen and congresswomen. And then they would come back home on the airplane. That got a little expensive. And so we ended up doing it by train, the Iron Gate Special. We did it from Grand Central up to New York, or Union Station up New York, did the same thing. So it was the Iron Gate where my local service was. But it's given me great opportunity to pay back to the Air Force and to help the men and women in the Air Force and now in the Space Forces. Thank you.
Thanks. And if I did my math right, you're at 49 years and counting. More or less.
More or less.
More or less. Joe?
Awesome. Happy birthday, AFA. Oh, this is the after lunch crowd. Y'all are a little quiet. Madam Chair, thanks so much, and to the panelists. It's a great time to spend with you guys. I feel like I've learned so much already. When I think back to, and by the way, you all couldn't see it, but I could see your faces every time they mentioned 1974, 1984, 50 years. Everybody, you saw the young folks say, like, who is that? What is that? I will tell you, as a daughter of an Army warrant officer who served for 24 years, and I'm a graduate of H.H. Arnold High School out in Wiesbaden, Germany. It's interesting because you hear all of these names of legends and greats, and you don't quite piece it together until you've lived long enough or served long enough where you can actually start to really understand the history. And so for me as a young airman, I'll be honest, I did not know what AFA meant or what they stood for. As I continued serving, becoming a non-commissioned officer and then a senior NCO, I started to understand fundamentally that we had advocacy groups, we had MSOs, we had groups that were fighting hard on our behalf, still not completely understanding or appreciating what that meant until I became a senior NCO. And then I actually started to pay more attention to who are the groups outside of the currently serving military that are working hard on our behalf on Capitol Hill, anywhere they can, to highlight the aspects of air power. And so it was when I became a senior NCO that I started to really understand that aspect. It wasn't until I became a senior master sergeant and a chief that I started to get dug in and want to know, where is AFA meeting near my base? How can I maybe get involved? How can I at least lend my name to that association so that our numbers count? And so it was really when I became a senior NCO and a chief that I got plugged into this great thing called AFA.
Thanks, Joe. Ken?
Well, my time with AFA goes back to a time when I was assigned to Strategic Air Command in the SIGSAC's office. I was a first lieutenant at the time, still trying to figure out how I got into that office because General Jim Keck, General Bill McBride, and Command Chief Jim McCoy, who later became the chairman of the board of this organization. And so I worked for General Doherty in that office, and I eventually left. And several years later, I'm on the staff of the University of San Francisco, and the phone rings, and it's General Doherty. General Doherty could always find anybody anywhere, in case you're wondering how he tracked me down. But he said, I want to talk to you about joining the professional staff of the Air Force Association, which we were called then. And so as some of the folks in this room know, you never say no to General Doherty. And so I came to AFA, and I was first worked as director of the Aerospace Education Foundation, then as executive vice president with General Chuck Donnelly, who was our boss at the time, and then for 19 years as your director of government relations. And after retiring and going back into law practice, I stayed on as the voice of AFA, and that ended up being for 42 years. So I had a hard time leaving. But it's been an amazing experience to represent AFA all over the place, but most especially representing us on Capitol Hill. I had the great privilege of presenting an amicus curiae brief before the Supreme Court. I had met so many wonderful and interesting people who loved our Air Force, our Space Force, our airmen, our guardians, and wanted to do right by them. So it's been a wonderful experience, and I'm indebted to AFA for giving me the challenge and the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Linda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I started in AFA when I graduated university down at Central Florida, University of Central Florida. In 1979, the Orlando chapter gave me a 1-year free membership. And here I am all these years later. I wasn't real active with AFA because at the time, if you wore the uniform, you weren't allowed to vote. You weren't allowed to hold a significant office. So there wasn't a lot of call for me to come be part of AFA. When I retired from the Air Force in 2007, I looked around and I said, I can't walk away from my airmen and, of course, now our guardians and their families. I'm not ready to hang up the uniform. Yeah, but I'm not ready to walk away from our people. And so I went to a couple of chapter luncheons, but I had this job and I was in corporate business development. So if any of you know about corporate business development, your life is not your own. So I couldn't commit to a chapter role. So I went to the chapter leader, the president, and I said, what else is there for me? And he said, how about the state level? We only meet once a quarter. And so Randy Hobbs is his name, and he became the Virginia state president. He pulled me into his umbrella. And I worked for the first 5 years in the education. I was the vice president of the education aerospace area. And then entered the pipeline to come up and be the state president and then on to the CER. And we'll see what happens next. But let me ask, for the people in the room, how many of you have been with the AFA team 1 year or less? We have a few. All right. Thank you. And for those of you in the room, how many of you have been with AFA for more than 10 years? A lot more hands are going up. So why I joined isn't as important or interesting to me as why I stayed. And I stayed because of the people. It's the people that you get up and you get charged for. We were talking about that in the room. Relationships are important and they're critical and they're fun, whether they're AFA team members or whether our airmen and our guardians or their families. It's so much fun to get out there, see people who don't think a thing like I do, which still shocks me all these years later, but they don't think like I do. And it's fun to interact with them and learn about them and get to experience what they see of the AFA mission and how they participate and where they participate. And so that's why I'm still here.
That's it.
Thank you, Linda. So I'm going to address this next question to Ken. AFA, as I think all of you know, was founded by 12 leaders. 2 of those prominent leaders were Jimmy Doolittle and Jimmy Stewart, and 10 others. And we understand you know a lot of those original founders. So can you tell us a story or two about
Sure.
AFA beginning?
As Madam Chair said, we were very active in 1946, and so we precede the Air Force by a year. And General Doolittle gathered a group together of 12 people. And every time you get the Almanac issue of the magazine, you can look on there and see the names of these founders, but very few people know anything about them. So the things I'll want to share with you are from 1946 to 1948. The original founders had 2 jobs. One was to start the Air Force Association, and the job of the Air Force Association was singular in the beginning, and that was to get the United States Air Force established as a separate military service. And there was a lot of support for that from our then President Harry Truman and from General Dwight Eisenhower, later President Eisenhower, who was the Army Chief of Staff at the time. They appointed a national media team to do a lot of things across the country, using Air Force Magazine, using television programs, radio programs, to go speak in communities, because we needed a lot of grassroots support. And this is how grassroots support within AFA started. And I was kidding Amy that she would have liked to have this communications team working for her as volunteers, because it was Colonel Jack Warner, who owned Warner Brothers Studios. It was Jimmy Stewart, and it was a young Captain Ronald Reagan. So they were the communications team, and they were responsible for getting the word out about starting a separate Air Force. And as you know, that happened in 1947. And then the emphasis shifted. Now that we had an Air Force, we needed to have support for that Air Force. And of course, it was at the end of World War II, and there was not a lot of support for spending a lot of money on the military. And of course, the Army and the Navy wanted to hold on to their share of the pie. So they had a big job. And among this group of 12, there were some very well-known people. AFA didn't have any money. So the first person who was appointed was the gentleman on the far left, that's W. Deering Howe. And he and his two brothers own the International Harvester Corporation and a major share of the Pullman Train Company. And so he was responsible for establishing a thing called the Founders Fund. And the Founders Fund was to get AFA office space, to hire professional staff, and to pay for those expenses needed to get the organization rolling. We needed to get the American public to stand up for resources for the Air Force so it wouldn't become a hollow force, as happened at the end of World War I. And everyone involved, all these folks, Mr. Howe was a pilot in both World War I and World War II. He unfortunately passed at the end of 1948 in a drowning accident. But all of these people had this job of getting AFA funded and getting our Air Force funded. Not showed up here, we needed a lawyer to pull all this together. And so Julian Rosenthal was a great guy and continued to advise AFA until he passed in 2003. And Julian was well known in New York City, and he put together our articles of incorporation, all of the regulatory documents, and he later wrote the manual, which has changed some, but not much, for running a national convention. He wrote that too.
Ken, if I could interrupt here, I apologize, but I had the privilege of meeting two founders, and Julian was one of them when I was president and chairman. My wife Tricia and I actually came back from a Georgia State AFA convention, drove up through Durham, North Carolina, and he was living there. So we stopped by to see him, and it was an honor, and he seemed pleased. We talked about the fact, Chief, I don't know if you know or not, he was the only person of the 12 founders that was an enlisted person when they started. So those people who think AFA is only officers and generals, the enlisted corps was at the very beginning with Julian. He went on to Columbus University and Fordham Law School and became an attorney. And he was instrumental in beginning the Iron Gate chapter up in New York City. But Julian was so pleased that we stopped by and see him that he actually gave me his original AFA cufflinks that he wore when he was the founder. And I was honored that he presented those to me. And I also have a blazer on here that has the Iron Gate buttons on it. So I have all the paraphernalia that we need in AFA, and everybody has it in AFA, but I just wanted to interject that. My only other founder I was able to meet was General Jimmy Doolittle out at the LA Ball years past.
And wasn't Julian selected as Man of the Year, like in 56
Yes.
time frame? So, he kept giving even after he got us started through the incorporation process.
I mentioned earlier that he was a well-known attorney in New York. He was a senior partner with a firm of Javits and Javits. And of course, Mr. Javits went on to be the mayor of New York and now has a convention center named after him. The gentleman on the far right is Lowell Palmer Weicker, and he was the director of intelligence for the Army Air Corps during World War II and worked directly for General Spaatz. And he used his considerable political and congressional influence to get financial support for our fledgling Air Force. And he was a really well-connected guy, and he went on to become the president and CEO of the Squibb Drug Company, and also became the Assistant Secretary General of NATO, and served as a United States Senator from Connecticut for many years. So he did a wonderful job raising awareness within the Congress. He had a lot of political connections about the need to fund the Air Force. The third gentleman up there is Cornelius Vanderbilt Whitney, known as Sonny Whitney, and he served as a key financial advisor for funding the Air Force. And he and his family of the Vanderbilts and the Whitneys came forward with many ingenious ways for the Air Force to acquire aircraft. They underwrote some loans. They had personal money they were willing to invest, things that you could never do today. But, there's an interesting story about Sonny Whitney. Was General Johnny Allison was a founding member of this organization, and he had been in the Flying Tigers in World War II, and the Republic of China, Taiwan, wanted to stand up an air force right at the end of World War II, but they were a new country. They didn't have any money, they didn't have any banking relationships, and yet they needed to buy equipment and airplanes. And so Mr. Whitney's family underwrote the acquisition of aircraft, a fleet of aircraft for the Taiwanese. It was $2 billion, which was it's a lot of money today, but it was really a lot of money in 1947. And in later years, he and his wife, Mary Lou, invited the AFA staff to go to their home for workshops in the summertime. They lived in Saratoga Springs, New York, and they own that Saratoga Springs racetrack, and they bred Kentucky Derby winner racehorses, is what they did in their retirement. But they welcomed us into their home for many years in the summertime. And then you see the second gentleman up there is Edward Beck Curtis. And he was in the famed 95th Aero Squadron in the First World War. And he was the chief of staff of U.S. strategic forces in Europe. And after the war, he returned to his job of CEO of the Eastman Kodak Company. And he was given the responsibility by General Doolittle of building corporate support for the new United States Air Force. In the 1950s, he ended up working for President Eisenhower to stand up the Federal Aviation Administration. And he received the Collier Trophy in 1957 for those efforts. And he was a devoted AFA member until his passing, and he and his wife were two of the real characters that I have met during my time here. And so that's just a brief snapshot of some of the folks who you read in the Almanac issue, but now you know a little bit about them. And the next time we get together on the next anniversary, I'll tell you some more about the other ones I didn't mention today.
I want a copy of your script. I don't have all those stories.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go off script here a little bit, if that's okay. I'm not going to put the two of you on the spot here at the end, but we had lunch in the conference room before we came in here and talked a little bit about the first two conventions. And so I wonder if Linda and Ken, you could talk. I know I'm asking you off the cuff, but can you share a little bit about the first two conventions?
The first two conventions, I'll take the first one. Okay. You can take the second one. The first one was held in Columbus, Ohio. And you have to remember that this was immediately after World War II. So most of our senior leaders at the time were under 30. And like a lot of people under 30, they really like to party. They really like to party. So they used to get all these bright ideas. And so they're out in Columbus, Ohio, and they thought it would be really nice if they could have some jet planes at the conference. And Selfridge Air Force Base had some P-80s. And so they decided that's what they were going to do. They were going to get those P-80s at the conference. Well, that meant taking down all the utility poles and power lines and pulling out all the parking meters in the main street. And they just lighted the planes on the street in the middle, in the middle of the city.
Easy, no problem, boss.
And then, couple thousand young people got to meet some of the local young people. And the Girls of Columbus provided never-ending entertainment with squirt guns and water balloons. And one of them had come to one of the original board meetings, no reflection on you, Kathleen, and found that the board meetings were kind of dull. So several of them got on horses and rode horses into the board meeting, and that actually livened up the board meeting.
There you
So
go.
that's a big
There you go.
hill for you to climb. Then, of course, not to be outdone, the next one was in New York in Madison Square Garden.
Right, and so it was a production. It was a Hollywood production. You know, you have people like Jimmy Stewart, who was doing the narration. You have people like Bob Hope. The story goes that the lights go out, the searchlights, like you're looking for planes, and then the lights come back on, and in the middle of parachutes is Bob Hope and a couple of the entertainers for the evening. So big production. Jackie Cochran, if you're familiar with her, is the one who single-handedly took on raising all the funds that were needed for that convention, which I thought was phenomenal because it was very expensive, even back in those days. So they had the same shenanigans, maybe a little different, but a similar kind of crowd. And the comment was made that while all of AFA is coming to Madison Square Garden, all of the Air Force is flying over to Berlin Airlift at the same time. And so quickly, right as soon as the Air Force started, they're on mission. They're on mission, and what an incredible mission. A couple of us got to meet one of the recipients of the candy bomb, dropping the candy over on the wall. Incredible young lady, incredible story, and so grateful, so thankful. Again, you get to meet all these interesting people when you work with AFA and the team AFA. So that was exciting. Some of our conventions are more exciting than others, let's just be honest, you know, but I thought the first two were the most exciting ones to learn about. If you haven't read Strobel's book, I recommend it to you. It's a quick read. It's a weekend. You can buzz right through it. But the convention, for those of you who maybe don't get to go because you're stuck back here, I mean, you're working back here, you might see if you can't get a volunteer opportunity to come out and support the convention, and you'll really meet a lot of our airmen, our guardians, their families. I think the team that does the Monument to Monument ride from Kitty Hawk up to the Air Force Memorial, they've done that now. I think this year's their 5th year doing that, raising money on that ride for our Wounded Airmen and Guardians program, which we're so very grateful. I think that program's raised over $1 million, or no, that can't be right. $100 million. Is that right? $100 million. So it's quite successful. That still doesn't seem right.
It isn't. Over $1 million.
Over $1 million. Okay, thank you, Christine in the back. I was looking, couldn't see you. But anyway, the conventions are a fun thing to attend. So if you're interested in attending the conventions, go volunteer. We always need more people out there. Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks, Linda. I'm going to ask you one
Sure.
other totally unrelated question to the conventions, but you've been very, very active at the local level, the state level, and the region level. Can you talk a little bit about the importance to have representation at the chapter level and the regional organizational level, and then maybe reflect back a little bit on what it looked like back in 1846?
1846?
19.
19.
I was listening.
Did I say 18?
I was like,
I meant
wow, it's
19.
really old up here.
I'm sorry, 1946.
So, you know, the very first job of anybody in AFA, as Ken's pointed out, was advocacy. Boots on the ground, advocating for Air Force. Job number 2 was advocating for 70 groups in the Air Force. And that was to make sure we didn't have a hollow Air Force when we created the Air Force a year later. That was very important. So it happens on the ground. Everybody that is working as a volunteer field leader, we're the ones going out to the schools getting Teachers of the Years. We're the ones meeting with the Civil Air Patrols, Virginia ROTC, the ROTC cadets, Arnold Air Society, Silver Wings, members of our communities. That is your chapter field leaders out there, the volunteers who are interacting, bringing the message of AFA to whatever they're interacting with, whether it's their church, their Rotary, other like-minded veteran organizations. We meet with those people too. So from my perspective, it's always been about the field, and the field has led AFA bringing that mission into fruition. Had great thinkers about what to do, but you have to have that execution arm, and that's where the field comes into play as the execution arm of our mission.
Thanks, Linda. Tom, can you, you're active in both the Aerospace Education Foundation and AFA, and can you share the history of how those two came together?
Oh, wow. That was a long time ago. I think I was 7 years old when it started, but I'll try if I can remember.
Thank you.
But no, the AFA, you know, when General Doolittle was the first president, he always wanted to keep education in the mission and to educate the American public, as my colleagues have said up here, on the need for air power and the national security. But in 1955, then National President Gil Rob Wilson made a statement at the convention that he wanted to get a connection between advocating for air power and educators, get it between our members and the educators. So they started the Air Force Association Foundation, which was a 501c3 that AFA is today, because for many years AFA was a 501c19, I believe it was. And but as a 501c3, they could get donations to help resource their education programs. As time went on, the names changed, but the mission was essentially there, educating the public and engaging with schools, providing scholarships. They even provided scholarships to the children of, unfortunately, deceased test pilots, because those test pilots, they were serving their country as test pilot, and when they unfortunately crashed, there was nothing for their family to help get the kids into college. So AFA back then was actually involved in that. As it evolved into the years that I was involved, we were doing Teacher of the Year for Krista McCullough from the Challenger accident. We were doing Pitzenbarger Awards. We were doing awards to the Community College of the Air Force, and all sorts of ways to support our airmen and the families of the airmen. As time went on, AFA, although it was a subsidiary of AFA, a lot of the leadership of AEF were the same people that were leaders in the AFA. So there was a synergism there, and we had a lot of educators that weren't involved in the military, but they brought the education aspect to the mission of AEF. But as time went on, we started to combine all of that, and as we are today in the Air and Space Forces Association, we have a vice chair for the field, and we have a vice chair for the aerospace education, and we have a president and a chairperson. So it all came together as one, and we're a 501c3 so that we could continue that sort of education and advocacy and supporting.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Chief Bass, going to circle back to you. So as the 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, you certainly worked an awful lot with AFA in your time in the chair. And can you tell us a little bit about what that meant and how AFA helps the Department of the Air Force, and then talk a little bit about the Outstanding Airman of the Year program and what that means to our enlisted force?
Absolutely. So I've always had a deep appreciation, again, for the work that AFA has done prior to even being the Chief Master in the Air Force, but more so when I was in this seat, appreciative of the work that's being done that I don't even see. And I think that's really important. And I'm going to tie into a little bit of what you all said, reflecting back on the history, because one thing is true. AFA has always deeply valued education and development of the force. So I'll kind of go off on a little commercial break, and then I'll come back to what you're talking about. Like your United States Air Force and the Space Force, we are the strongest military in the world because of the people. And primarily because nobody trains, develops, and educates like the people. And so again, when you look back at the history of what AFA has done to shape the development of the people, the service members, our airmen, and now our guardians, that is a powerful thing that, again, as a Chief Master in the Air Force, is just happening. But it was monumental. Like I think back to, we talked about it earlier, Project Utah.
Project Utah.
Project Utah, where an AFA chapter in Utah, is that right? knew that one of the things challenging our airmen is they were PCSing back and forth where they weren't able to get college credits. The accreditation piece wasn't happening as well as it could have. And oh, by the way, if we're the most trained force in the world, how do we actually get credit for the tech training and the other training that we put our airmen through at a civilian institution? And so the Community College of the Air Force was really birthed because of Project Utah back in 1956. 56. I think it's 67.
Oh, it's 67.
Let's bet a beer on it.
That was the Chief
Okay.
Master Sergeant
Okay,
of the Air
no,
Force.
yes, no, I'm joking. Y'all didn't see that. Only Starbucks. But I think it was 1967 when they started Project Utah, where they took the training documents that our airmen go through in tech training, compared it to a two-year universities in Utah, and was like, man, the training that they get far surpasses even what our college institutions give. And so anyway, CCF was born. But all that to say, AFA has always had a deep commitment to the enlisted force through development and making sure that we can continue being the strongest force in the world because of that development. So always grateful and appreciative. Also appreciative that in 1956, a program was started, and it was the 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year, which is pretty amazing for some of y'all who are new to the organization or new to the Air Force. If you've never been to a 12 Outstanding of the Year, I encourage you to go there, because that's where we have the opportunity as an Air Force, with the support and help of AFA, to honor our top airmen across the force who've just been crushing it that year. And so we have 12 of those airmen. They become ambassadors of the force. They are out there for that entire year talking about and sharing the talking points that their senior leaders are doing. But AFA, since, again, 1956, this year will be the 70th anniversary of the 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year program, which is a big deal, a way for us to honor the people who make the mission happen and make our Air Force so very great. So I'm appreciative. Yes. I am appreciative of the work that you all do, that you perhaps don't even really understand that impact. But it's a huge morale boost to our airmen. It's a huge morale boost to our Air Force in the connective tissue that you all have had and the support that you've had for understanding that the enlisted force is really the backbone of the Air Force.
And it's not just the winners of the award, it's their whole unit.
Yes.
Their whole unit is there. I mean, if they could, they would show up at the dinner. Normally they only get a supervisor, I think, to be able to go, because that's just the way it works. But the whole unit takes pride in that airman or that guardian.
Yes.
The guardians have it a little bit different, but yeah, it's really important.
And just to add on to this, I have a little personal story. A friend of mine was one of the 12 Outstanding Airmen of the Year in 1985, so a long time ago. And as a result of that, both of his sons joined the Air Force. One joined active duty, just retired last year as a C-17 pilot, and the other one's in the Air National Guard.
Yeah.
So
I was there.
You were there? Oh, you would know. You probably shook his hand. So thanks, Joe.
Absolutely.
So I want to switch topics a little bit here. And I know all of us in this room, not folks out in virtual land, but we can go outside the door here and we can look up the hill and see the Air Force Memorial, which is quite spectacular. And Tom, we know you are an integral part of building the Air Force Memorial, and like to hear a little bit of insight from you on how the project came about and what AFA's role was in building the memorial.
I appreciate that, but integral part, I was part of. We had so many people that really made this Air Force Memorial the success that it ended up being. I was fortunate. It actually happened back in 1990. We used to have our board meetings, you wouldn't believe it or not, at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs. We were out there, and the nominating committee met, and they selected Ollie Crawford to be the next national president of the Air Force Association. And as Ken had alluded to, some AFAers will have a libation or two and get a little creative. And I remember sitting around the fire at the back of the hotel, just looking over the lagoon there, and Ollie was talking about to several of us. He said, you know, if I get elected in the fall, because it happens in the fall, he says, I'm going to have an objective to get an Air Force memorial for our nation. He says the Marines have Iwo Jima. The Navy has a great memorial down on Pennsylvania Avenue. The Army has a soldier on every corner on horseback in Washington, D.C. that you can imagine. The Coast Guard even has a smaller memorial up in Arlington National Cemetery, but the United States Air Force had nothing. So he, after he got elected, he came to 5 of us, Major General Johnny Allison of Flying Tigers fame and past national president. He asked Johnny to be the secretary of the foundation, and he asked George Douglas, Major General, U.S. Air Force Reserve, to serve, Marty Harris from Orlando, and Jack Price from Utah, and myself. And it has been an honor since then that he did that. But he was a great visionary. And then, as I said, we brought in many other people because it took a lot of folks to get this happen. When you're raising, you know, we started out raising $25 million, and it actually went north of that, as everything does in the world. But we got people, our first chairman was Ollie Crawford, and then they got Joe Coors Jr. to be the chairman of the Air Force Memorial Foundation. And Joe took us through the first phase. If you remember, the Air Force Memorial wasn't always these great 3 spires. There was Arlington Ridge, which we had gotten approval for of a limited height, 50-foot height memorial over there, that a gentleman named James Freed of Paycobb Freed in New York, who did the Holocaust Museum. Paycobb Freed did the Louvre over in Paris. And he actually got the first award to do a memorial at Arlington Ridge, about 600 feet from Iwo Jima Memorial. That all worked out for a while until one day Bob Springer, who was the new executive director of the Air Force Memorial, called me up and said, Tommy, I've got to go over tonight and just give a little briefing on what we're doing over here, and it's to a group called the Friends of Iwo Jima. And I said, oh, okay. He said, I don't think it's a big deal, but I'll let you know how it goes. 6 years later, it was actually very soon it became a big deal. So there was controversy of us being over there. But I will tell you, to this day, it worked out for the betterment of everyone. And my brother is a former Marine. I hug him, and I hug any Marine I can to say thank you, because you didn't want us over there. We have the best site now where we are. And so we started making it happen, and we dedicated it on October 14th of 2006.
I was there.
There you go.
Some of us will be there.
And
So-
as a lesson to the staff, we had a seemingly immovable object with the United States Marine Corps. And we kept talking in this group about we needed an inn. We needed an inn. So the inn we got was, I hired James Jones Jr., who was the son of the Marine Corps Commandant, to work in our government relations department. And then we had a direct line to the Commandant whenever we needed it, daily.
Of all those things that were happening, the 3 principles that really made the new site happen, I give credit to former Senator John Warner from Virginia, General Mike Ryan, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and Deputy Secretary of Defense Rudy DeLeon.
Yes.
Because those 3 worked it out. We had looked at the current site, but it was so close to the Navy annex there, and that had no plans to be raised anytime soon. 20 years, they said. So we took it off the possibilities. When Senator Warner got involved, we got some legislation that said we're going to take down that first building within 2 years. We said, okay, we'll look back there again. And General Ryan, Rudy DeLeon, everything started to fill in, and it happened.
So Ken just revealed one of the secrets related to the building of the Air Force Memorial, but I hear there's a few more.
What secret did you release?
Who we
on
hired.
who he hired.
Oh,
On who he hired.
Oh, okay.
And
well,
Maybe-
there are a couple things about the Air Force Memorial you might not know. I mean, you know, when you're going to build 3 huge spires, the tallest one being 270 feet, the second one's 230 feet, and the third one is 201 feet. You say, are those things going to stand up there forever? And they kind of look a little bit like the arch in St. Louis, except it's connected. So it has a little more strength and everything with all the weather. And we're saying you got 3 big spires up there. So they did some wind tunnel tests and what have you, and actually came up with a system of, they filled them with rebarb and concrete, all of them up to about 2/3 of their height, individual height. But they also have in there these steel balls that are 20 inches in diameter, I believe, and they're encased in a padded box, these steel balls. Now, for those of you who might remember back in 1940, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge that started swaying and the wind was so strong, it actually totally collapsed the bridge. We certainly didn't want that to happen to the Air Force Memorial. And so they put these steel balls in these boxes. There are 6 of them in the tallest spire. There are 4 of them in the middle spire, and there are 3 of them in the smallest spire. And these balls, as the wind oscillates the spire, the ball just dampens that oscillation so it won't fail, okay? We hope it won't. Now, we had it done in wind tunnel tests, and we said it's got to be worthy up to hurricane strength, 85 miles per hour. So I don't know if we've had a hurricane come through since 2006 with that sort of strength. And I haven't seen this for fact, but they have told me that if you get above 100 knots of wind, the wind whistles through those 3 spires and plays the Air Force song. I don't know if there's any truth to that, and I'm not sure I could stand out there at 100-mile-an-hour wind, but we hope that's the case. But it is, it's been built to last over 200 years, I know that. Now, the last thing, really isn't a secret anymore, thanks to Air Force Magazine. Where's Tobias back there? Years ago, when we were in a foundation meeting and we were talking about the spires and everything, I had been told from a friend that the Washington Monument, when it was completed, had a metal cap put on the apex right at the very top, and they engraved the Latin words, Laus Deo, praise be to God. So I thought, what if we put something on top of the tallest spire? And we talked about it, and I'm sure many of you have heard of John Gillespie McGee Jr.'s High Flight. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth, danced the skies, laughter silvered wings. The very last sentence is put out my hand and touched the face of God. We did ... and touched the face of God. And we put that on the very tallest spire. It's engraved up there. You could climb up and see it, or you could come to me and I'll show you a picture of it, because I had it done before we got it up there. But that was a secret. We kind of kept it as an internal neat thing to know. And then someone, you know, Air Force Magazine is so good at getting real information. They went out there and dug up the story and found out something's up there, and they put it. Say what? Yeah, Tobias climbed up there. I have been up the tallest spire when it was being built. They had the scaffolding on the top, and it went up to about 2/3 of the way, and they let many of us on the Memorial Foundation walk up there and look in and everything. It was amazing. But so that's the secrets, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Kathleen,
Thank you.
can I add
Absolutely.
something? You know, oftentimes people can get a little overwhelmed when they think about going to the service memorials, right? Especially if they're the ones by the mall. What I would say is parking is a whole lot easier here, but especially for the folks who are online, and you know, if you come to DC, do not come here and not visit your Air Force Memorial. And that goes for everybody in this room. Like, this is your memorial, and so there's not a prouder sight than this place. And so I would encourage every single one of you, you have got to go to your memorial.
Let me just say a few words that are important, I think, about the memorial is, okay, you have the 3 spires, and a lot of people think it represents the Thunderbird bomb burst. Yes, it could do that. Some people say it's an ICBM taking off, you know, in this direction, that direction. Some people,
Let's hope not.
some people say it represents the core values of the Air Force: integrity first, service before self, and excellence. All we do, or valor, courage, and sacrifice. All sorts of things. And there's a star in the middle that every airman has on his or her uniform, on their buttons. There's stars on aircraft, all that. So it fits perfectly there. But a very important part of our Air Force Memorial is the Honor Guard,
Yes.
because it represents our nation's flag, our Air Force flag, the campaign streamers, and it's held by men and women of our enlisted force. And as the Chief said earlier, and I used to say this in many speeches, if we didn't have an enlisted force in the Air Force, we'd have to shut down in 3 days, because they are the backbone of our Air Force. And the Guardians have the same thing with our Space Forces now. So that Honor Guard, which there's replicas of around here in AFA, that was so important. And a gentleman, a sculptor, Zenos Frodakis, is the man who designed that. He worked intently with the former Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Gerald Murray, when he was in the seat. And many of the Honor Guard stood there as he sculptured this whole stuff.
Yeah, it's molded from real people. This was
Right.
not
It's amazing.
some artist conception of what airmen would look like. These were actually molded from real airmen.
That's awesome.
So I just have to say the discussion we've heard today has just been incredible, and I wish we could do this for another few hours, but I don't think we have that much time. But I mean, just the stories we heard from each and every one of you just really, I think, symbolizes the heart and soul of AFA. So thank you for everything that you have done for AFA and what you continue to do for AFA. But I'd like each one of you to just take a minute as we celebrate the 80th birthday of AFA and give us your quick thoughts on what the next 80 years might look like. And I'm going to start with Linda, and we'll come this way.
I actually wrote something down, and I want to make sure I get the words right, because I think it's kind of important as we look at our birthday. So my toast for AFA is, may you celebrate a lifetime of birthdays, and may each one be the birthday of a lifetime. Oh, happy birthday.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, very nice.
When you look at the last 80 years, this organization has done some amazing things for our Air Force, our Space Force, but most assuredly for the people who serve in every part of our Air and Space Forces. That will continue in the future. We'll do some things for all of these people in the future that we couldn't even imagine right now. I was listening to one of our young members at the conference this year. I get to meet a lot of people sitting up there at the production table. And he came up and introduced himself, and I said, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm in the Space Force. And why are you in the Space Force? He said, I'm going to Mars. And so that got me to thinking, well, what role is AFA going to play in that? Are we going to be up on Capitol Hill hustling money for the Space Force to do these distant missions? Yes, we are. Are we going to be providing services for this young man's family while he's gone on a 10-month mission? Yes, we are. So I think AFA has a very bright future, not only for what we do now, but what we couldn't even envision is going to happen in the future. And we'll be there. We'll be doing it.
Thank you.
So when I think about the future of AFA, I'll try not to get depressing, because some of y'all have heard me speak at AFA and I can depress myself. But some of that is because we're not short of challenges, right? Like if you think about, 2026, we are not short of challenges. In fact, you've heard many senior leaders talk about we're serving at an inflection point in our nation. And while I don't have the history of AFA, I can think back to when I joined the Air Force and how very different it was. We had at that time almost double the amount of people serving in the Air Force, right? We had to focus really primarily on 3 warfighting domains, air, land, and sea, and we dominated. And when you fast forward to today, we are not short of challenges. Our force is smaller than it's ever been. And not only do we have to be good in air, land, and sea, but we better be good in air, land, sea, space, cyber, and information. And I would offer, if we lose in any of those last three, you can't even generate air power. And so we are at an inflection point in history where your military needs your advocacy more than ever. It will take a complete whole of nation approach to get after this. And so we need AFA, and we need AFA to be relevant and fighting the good fight, so the Department of the Air Force can do the things that only they can do. And oh, by the way, no other branch of service can do anything without the Department of the Air Force. And so the work that all of you do here, the work that y'all do online is hugely critical. And while we celebrate 80 years, or in the Air Force, over 70, and we just recently celebrated a few years ago, 50 years of an all-volunteer force, I get excited for that, but I get more excited if we can celebrate 100 and 150, so we all have work to do. Happy birthday.
When General Doolittle was the first president, he talked about education and advocating, and our mission in AFA for many years has been those things: educate, advocate, and support. I think in the next 80, it's the same thing. I would suggest, back in my day, the executive director then was General John Schott, a great gentleman. I hope he's watching. Sir, I hope you're watching and you're doing well. But General Schott and I were a team that would go over to the Hill and also into the Pentagon itself, talk to the leadership of the Air Force. Ken was legislative liaison here, or government relations, whatever it's called, and he would get us over there. We would talk to every freshman who came to the Hill after they were elected. Now, back then, there weren't a whole lot of veterans that were serving on the Hill. There are more now because of Afghanistan and what have you. But I would go in an office and talk to a congressman or a congresswoman, and I met one young congressman in Virginia, and I went and started talking about munitions and everything, and you could see his eyes just kind of glaze over. He didn't know what a munition was, but he knew what soybeans were. And I didn't know what soybeans were. So anyway, we were talking the same language. And I would talk to him about bombs that come off airplanes and all these things that the Air Force needed. And General Schott and I would go in and talk to Air Force L&L. And at that time, it was Major General Buzz Mosley, who later became the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. And we would talk about the number of Air Force personnel that were serving in uniform on the Hill in the various offices, the Air Force office. The Marines have them, the Navy have them, the Army have them. But I always felt that we didn't have the extent that our fellow services did. The Navy and the Army and the Marines have been on the Hill for years. They have built relationships. They are professional staffers that have gotten policy changes. So we still have aircraft carriers, and we need them. But we have a lot of things that they were instrumental in doing. If we had that same sort of engagement with Air Force or Space Force guardians on the Hill, and then after they retire, who might go and work on the Hill in a professional venue, I think we would be able to change policy for both the Space Forces and the Air Force more so. And I think that's going to be important over the next 80 years, if you will. And all of these young men and women that are sitting here in this, what I call the hangar, I know it's not official, but it's a great opportunity for you all to really be effective. Because as Linda said, the field is what gets things done at the local area. It's important for the field to have those relationships in the local area, build up relationships with their congressperson, their senator. But they work in concert with AFA headquarters here and with this staff. We are all one team, and as one team, we will make a better air and space force for the future. Thank you.
Very, very well said. Well, with that, I'd just like to thank everybody on the live stream for joining us today, and for folks that are here. And again, thank you to all of our incredible panelists for the time you took today to come here and do this for this group and the broader audience, and for everyone else that looks at it online later on. And for folks that are here in the room, come join us in the back of the room for a little bit of refreshments and celebration.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.